Hi everyone, Tony Costa here from Toronto Apologetics. So glad that you could join us. I'd like to encourage you, if you've not done so already, to subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free, and also to like and to share the video. Today, I want to talk about a video that went viral on TikTok about a high school teacher who was actually claiming that child sacrifice, as was practiced amongst the Incas, that is the Aboriginal people of Ecuador. Some of the Aboriginal peoples are known by these various terms. So, the Aboriginal peoples of Mexico were the Aztecs, the Aboriginal peoples of Peru were the Mayans, and the Aboriginal peoples of Ecuador were the Incas. Well, a lot of these civilizations, these ancient civilizations, many of them had one thing in common, and that was the concept of human sacrifice, of offering up humans as offerings to the gods to control weather, to control crop seasons, and so forth. But this particular video of this high school teacher that has been making the rounds is quite alarming, to say the least. And so, what I wanted to do here is I wanted to share that video to begin with. And then what I'd like to do is also stop and make several comments about the issues and the statements that this teacher brings up. And so let's take a listen then to what this teacher has to say. And as I said, it's not very long, and I will break when necessary. So let's take a listen here.
I will die on this hill. I'm specifically talking about the Inca here. We're not talking about the Mexica. That's a whole separate type of sacrifice. If we're just looking at Tawantinsuyu, the Quechua people of the Incan Empire, they practice sacrifices like most other civilizations throughout.
Like most civilizations throughout the world. Yeah, so what's your point? That somehow human sacrifice is a good thing? Yeah, they did sacrifice human lives throughout the world, but this is known as the tu quoque fallacy. Well, you did it, and so therefore we did it, so what's the big problem? Well, the big problem is that you're talking about the taking of human life here. And so let's carry on and listen to what she has to say.
History did in times of crisis. So, famine, natural disasters. But the unique thing about the Quechua is that when you're looking at like the Incan civilization, you essentially have the elites and then you have everyone else. Sacrifices were volunteers from the elite class because they believed that the elites were closer to the gods and could therefore appease them better.
So the elites, those among the elites, were willing to sacrifice themselves. Not always the case. South American scholars who studied these ancient civilizations will argue it wasn't just the elites. Among other civilizations, they also took slaves and sacrificed the slaves to their gods and so on. But people just offering themselves, like suicide bombers, that's kind of hard to swallow. That people just said, yeah, yeah, just take my life. I'm an elite person in society, but I'm just going to give my life up. That doesn't sound like what humans generally do. If humans kill themselves for a certain religion or a cult, like they did, for example, in Guyana, in Jonestown, being deceived by the false prophet and false teacher and cult leader Jim Jones, then yes, people will drink the cyanide. But if you have studied what happened in Guyana in the 1970s with Jim Jones, a lot of those people tried to escape so that they wouldn't die. They didn't want to die. They didn't want their children to die, and those who tried to escape were shot. So it's not the case that people just happily just put themselves out there and say, yeah, yeah, just sacrifice me. I should be. I'm pretty good with that. Again, I think there's too much going on here in terms of what this teacher is saying here that just doesn't seem to fit the human experience.
Also, in terms of sacrifice, they were kind about it. Hear me out.
They were kind about it. So in terms of sacrifice, killing human beings as sacrifices, they were kind about it. Now, folks, what type of a world are we living in today where people now are talking about killing the unborn in the womb as health reform for women. It's reproductive health for women when it's actually the termination of a life in the womb, the termination of the elderly, offering them MAID as they do here in Canada, medical assistance in dying, and getting rid of children in the womb who have Down syndrome or who may have physical disabilities, killing them before they're born, and in some cases, killing them after they're born, as I have personal experience of a case where that actually happened. So some of these sacrifices were kind. And she goes, hear me out, hear me out. They were kind, even though they involved children as well. The Incas would also sacrifice their children, and some of the means by which they killed these children in the Incan Empire that she's talking about. Well, there were at least five methods of slaughtering and killing their children. Well, one of them was strangulation, where they would strangle them to death. Secondly, they would some of them would kill them by a blow to the head. Some skeletal remains in the South American continent, among some of the ancient civilizations there, particularly in Peru. They have found a mass grave of children with smashed bones in their skull, with holes in their skull, which would indicate there was a blunt force that was applied to the child. A third one would be suffocation. They would suffocate the children as they kill them as a sacrifice. And then others, they would be buried alive during a state of unconsciousness. They would bury them alive. And in some cases, when they would take these children to the high mountains, in some cases, these children would die of hypothermia. And that is why some archaeologists have found some mummified children where they're seated with their knees towards their face, and so some of them would have died by hypothermia. So let's listen to this wonderful historian here as she tells us about how sacrifice, some of them were kind.
Because unlike the Mexica, when you're like ripping out, is still beating hard out of someone.
Yeah, which is not bad. Mashika ripping out a beating heart. It's all cultures are equal, right? Isn't that what we keep hearing in our modern society in the West? Are we not told that we should not judge other people's cultures? All cultures are equal, including cultures that basically tied down their enemies and cut open their chest and cut out their heart while it's still beating and presented to the sun god. She doesn't seem to be quite alarmed by this. See, she almost sounds like she's overly excited about this.
Someone's chest. The Inca would intentionally use coca leaves and would use chicha and would drug up the sacrifice.
Wonderful. That really makes it better. They would use cocoa leaves and they just drug up the sacrifice. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way they put dogs down, or the way they execute criminals in jail by lethal injection. We just drug them up. Does this not sound uncannily familiar to MAID in Canada, medical assistance in dying, where they inject the patients and basically stop their heart? They put them in a state of unconsciousness. Well, that's what it really sounds like.
And then leave them on a mountain, a cold, chilly mountain, to be exposed to the elements.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing. Child abandonment. We just put children on mountains, drug them up a bit, and then, they'll die by hypothermia. Yeah, it's just what cultures used to do. Well, if we do that today, there would be charges of child abuse, and there would be various charges and imprisonment and so forth. But remember, the Incas also killed their victims by strangulation, blows to the head, suffocation, burying them while they were drugged up. They would bury them in a grave, or they would simply put them on a mountain somewhere, and they would die by hypothermia. But it gets worse. Not only does she think that this is a wonderful thing, We'll just drug up those kids and they'll serve as a sacrifice. Just get ready for another surprise announcement she's going to make.
Which, if you're good, a volunteer sacrifice where you're heavily drugged before you die. Also, I mean,
Yeah, you're heavily drugged before you die. What can go wrong? I mean, that sounds pretty, that sounds pretty considerate, don't you think? I mean, can you imagine that this lady is a teacher? Would you want a teacher like this talking to your children in a classroom, talking about death and talking about these sacrifices that almost sound suicidal? Would you want this in your school? A teacher like this? And she's talking about like, hey, this is cool. This is really cool stuff here. They're just drugged up and why not? Kids are drugged up. They won't notice anything. The fact that in the 21st century we are hearing this type of rhetoric tells you immediately about the signs of the times in which we live. We're living in a time where people have been desensitized to the sanctity of life. They've been desensitized to the importance of life. That human beings they're not just commodities, that human beings are not just a means to an end, but that human beings are souls made in the image of God with inherent value and dignity. And yet we're hearing this rhetoric that, well, the ancient civilizations, that was their culture. And that's cool. I wouldn't want this woman around my children or my grandchildren. And yet this is the type of stuff that passes for progressivism. We're in big trouble, folks.
I can equate human sacrifice throughout history to so many things.
Yeah. And they were wrong and they were bad. That's where they were condemned over and over and over again in the Bible. God condemned the sacrifice of humans. And when the colonizers came to South America, when the Spaniards under Cortez came to the Americas, and when Columbus came to the Caribbean islands, what was one of the first things they did? They said, it's not right to kill human beings. It's not right to kill children. That human beings are made in the image of God. And so you can imagine why in the Caribbean, and the word Caribbean, by the way, Caribbean islands, the Caribbean was named after the Carib tribe, a tribe in the islands in the Caribbean Sea that cannibalized their opponents. They cannibalized their opponents. They raped their wives and so forth. In some cases, some of these Aboriginal groups, particularly those in Australia, the ancient Aborigines in Australia, some of these groups would cannibalize their enemies, and then particularly a leader, let's say a chief of a certain group, an Aboriginal group, an Aborigine group in Australia, for example, they would consume their enemies, and then they would basically defecate the remains, presumably of that person that they've eaten, and then they'd send it to the opposing tribe as a mockery, as a threat. Are all cultures equal? Really? I mean, I thought that we have gone beyond all that and recognized that people have dignity and integrity and human rights. But you're going to notice that while she's praising these ancient civilizations that committed these heinous crimes, these abominable acts, you're going to notice a little jab she's going to take. Let's listen in.
And I think the fact that a lot of people are commenting, oh, but the sacrifice is again indicative of the fact that you have received a quite white education.
There you go. The reason why you're criticizing these human sacrifices, including child sacrifices, the reason why you're opposing this and you think it's wrong and it's bad is because you received a white education. Isn't that wonderful? A white education. So if you are against these ancient peoples, the Incas and the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Aborigines, if you are against these sacrifices that they committed against their enemies and committed with their children and so forth, the reason why you're criticizing all this and you're condemning it is because you got a white education, which is very strange because she's white. And imagine if she said you received a black education, you received an Asian education, she would be shut down, probably fired from her job. But notice that this virtue signaling that goes on. Well, this is because of this is a white education. This is why you think these sacrifices are wrong. No, they're wrong because whether they're committed against white people, black people, red people, yellow, brown people, the Aboriginal peoples were not white people, and yet it was the white colonizers that told them to stop because all human beings are made in the image of God, irrespective of your color. There is no black human souls, no white human souls. There is no red human souls, brown human souls. There's only human souls. The color has to do with our bodies, our physical bodies, but our souls don't have color. We are made in the image of God. And so there's this cultural Marxist attitude against the white man is the colonizer, the white man is the oppressor, everyone else is oppressed. The white man is privileged. There's white privilege. And again, where do people think it's okay to attack a certain ethnic group, but not to do that with other ethnic groups? This is the height of hypocrisy.
Because you are knowing them for the bad things that they have done and not all of the wonders that they accomplished.
Like what? You only think of the bad things that they have done. Killing human beings and killing little children, yeah, that's pretty bad. And so you see how she just sweeps that under the rug. There is no conviction. There is no conviction in the heart that this is an abominable evil that was committed against these people, an abominable evil. But they don't care because at the root level, when you reject God, if you reject God and you claim God is dead, the moment you say God is dead, man is dead. Because if God does not exist and there's no moral code, then we are nothing but jungle animals and we can do whatever we want. We can kill our children, we can kill our neighbor, we can kill whoever we want. And that is totally fine because there's no moral code. There's no objective morality. But this is where our schools have descended into such a cesspool of indoctrination. Kids are not being taught education. They're not being taught about math and science and geography and English and so forth. They're being taught Marxism, cultural Marxism, wokeism. And this is where we're at, where teachers are now talking about human sacrifice as, well, you think it's a bad thing, but that's because of your white education. But there's a lot of good stuff.
So I hope that this maybe helps you understand a different part of my most favorite civilization of all time, the Inca.
So her most favorite civilization were the Incas. I wonder if she would be a willing participant in the sacrifices that were performed. I wonder if she would be one of those, yeah, just take my heart out or just put me on a mountain somewhere, let me freeze to death, or just give me a blow to the head, and I'm all cool with that. No remorse, no conviction, none whatsoever. And that's what happens, folks. When we reject God, then we reject our inherent value as human beings. We become basically worthless. Now, here's the thing I just want to share with you. What I want to share with you is this idea that all cultures are equal. Are they? So on the left side there, this is the remains of a child in Peru that was massacred along with many, many others, the mass grave that archaeologists found. And why were these children killed? To appease the sea god from bringing about a massive hurricane that would have devastated their fields and their crops. And so as a result of that, they offered all these children in sacrifice. And many of these children, their skulls were bashed in. There were holes in their skulls. On the right side, of course, you have an example of the Aztecs, where they would hold the victim down and the priest, or let's say the chief, the high priest, so to speak, would cut open that man's chest while he's still alive and rip out his beating heart and offer it up to the sun god. And so you can understand why, when the colonizers came to the Americas, the Spanish colonizers like Cortez and the conquistadors, and when you think of Columbus, you can understand why a number of tribes actually liked the white guys, because the white guys were keeping them from getting killed like this. But this is not what we hear in our society and in our schools. We're told that all cultures are equal. This is nothing new, folks, because in the Bible, the Israelites, when they fell into paganism, they began to offer up their children. They used to commit child sacrifices by offering up children to the god Moloch. And what you would have is a statue, like you see there with a bull's head, and that's an idol, a statue. And what they would do is there would be a hollow, a hole within the statue, which was presumably made of bronze, and they would have a fire inside the belly of this idol. And the children would be placed on the arms of this idol, which is on an angle. The children would roll down into the belly of this idol, and they would be consumed, burnt alive. Now you'll notice in this depiction here, people with trumpets, and we have even historians, Greek historians, telling us about these events, talking about how when they would throw the children into the belly of this idol, they would blow the trumpets and the flutes, and they would yell to drown out the screams and the agony, the screaming agonies of these little children that were put into the belly of this false god, Moloch. And so God, through the prophets, primarily Jeremiah, condemned Israel for offering up their children in the fire, something that God calls an abomination to him, something that he warns them. For example, in Deuteronomy 18, he warns them about not offering up their children to false gods. Don't let them pass through the fire, as we read in Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 to 13. And this apostasy in Israel, this act of these Jews offering up their children and burning them alive, the area where this was done was known as the Valley of Hinnom. And here you could see that the Hinnom Valley, the Valley of Hinnom, in Hebrew, it's known as Gi Hinnom, meaning Valley of Hinnom. Jerusalem, as you could see there, goes towards the north there. And you could see the Mount of Olives in the background. And the Valley of Hinnom is where that arrow is pointing down. That is the valley, or the Hinnom Valley. Now, that's the location in that valley where the Israelites were doing this, where they were offering up their children to the god Moloch. And it was in that area called the Valley of Hinnom, or Gehinnom. Now, this place, Gehinnom, because the Israelites committed these gross immoralities, these gross abominations in burning their children alive, because they did this in the Valley of Hinnom, that valley not only was a place of derision, a place of basically a cursed place because of what they did there, but it eventually became such a repulsive place that it became basically the garbage dump of Jerusalem, where they would throw out their garbage and they would incinerate the garbage in the Valley of Hinnom. And so the history, the the abominable history of that area was so repulsive. It became so repulsive to the prophets, like Jeremiah. It became so repulsive to the prophets and to the Jewish people after the exile, when they went to Babylon and learned their lesson. It became such a place of derision that they converted it into a garbage dump. And not only was it converted into a garbage dump, but when they saw the fires of Gehenna, where they threw not just refuse and garbage, they would throw the bodies of dead animals here. This was basically a fiery garbage dump. It became such a repulsive area that in Greek, the name of this place was Gehenna. You may have heard of Gehenna. Gehenna is the Greek version of the Hebrew Gehinnom. And Gehenna is the word that is used in the Greek New Testament for hell, for the lake of fire. And so when Jesus warns about those who will be cast out into Gehenna, where the fire is not quenched, this is the imagery he's using. And the Jews came to identify the idea of hell or the lake of fire. They came to identify hell by this imagery. This was what gave them the understanding that hell was the place of not just punishment, but it was the place where the worm does not die. And where do you get worms, of course, or maggots? You get them on dead bodies. And so when people would go by this valley, they would see dead corpses of animals, and possibly even some people may have been homeless people may have been thrown on there, for all we know, and decomposing bodies produce attract flies, which then land on the bodies, the corpses, and then they lay their eggs, and then you have larvae and maggots. And so the description of Gehenna becomes one of the place where the worm does not die. It's the place where the fire is not quenched. It's the place of gnashing of teeth, describing pain and torment. And so that place where children were sacrificed in, that place became the imagery of eternal punishment to describe the place where people go to who reject the gospel, who reject Jesus Christ. This is where Jesus speaks of in Matthew 25, depart from me, you cursed ones, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. And so that's how serious God took the sacrifice of children, that the very place where that happened became a cursed place. It became an unclean place. It became a garbage dump, and it became a place of incineration where the fire consumes and the fire burns. And then that imagery was applied to the eternal state of the damned. And so, folks, I trust that this brief video has been helpful and given you some insight into where we are today as a society. And human sacrifice still goes on today in Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom, and Western Europe, and Australia, New Zealand, and what we call the West. Goes on in Asia, goes on all over the world. Today, human sacrifice is also known as abortion. And so when children are sacrificed because their parents don't want to raise them, or their parents feel they're going to be a burden, an obstacle in their lives, those children are being sacrificed. It's still going on. And so humans have not changed. This idea of sacrificing and giving innocent life up is still going on today, which shows that we're not so different from these ancient pagans who did the same. The only answer, of course, is the Lord Jesus Christ. We need Christ. I'd like to, again, remind you all to subscribe to the channel, to like the channel, and to share it. I also want to mention my book, No King But Christ, The Collapse and Bankruptcy of Secular Worldviews. I touch a little bit on this as well in this book. So in this book, No King But Christ, I address various topics. I talk about the basis of moral absolutes and God as the absolute moral giver, the clash of worldviews. I talk about sexual identity, the whole transgender debate. I talk about social justice. What is social justice? And the battle for truth. I talk about God's ultimate plan for this world, this planet as we know it, in terms of his end purpose at the end of time. And I also talk about the Christ and Antichrist. The figure of Antichrist, is it a person, an organization, an idea, a philosophy? And I basically show how the dichotomy between Christ and Antichrist is fleshed out in the progress of human history. And then I also have a conclusion here on the effect of cultural Marxism in the church and society. So that book is available on Amazon. I will leave a link to that book in the description box. Another book that I have out as well is Early Christian Creeds and Hymns, What the Earliest Christians Believed in Word and Song, an exegetical and theological approach. So this book deals with the various creeds that are entrenched in the text of the New Testament. I talked a little bit about the Old Testament, but most of this is the New Testament. And so what I do is in this book is I extract those ancient creeds that are found in the text of the New Testament, and I also extract the hymns. You may not know this, but there are hymns also entrenched in the New Testament text. And so there will be a link to that book also in the description box. And so again, just want to thank all of you for joining in and listening in. Again, share this video with others, like it. And as I said, if you have not become a subscriber, please do so. It's absolutely free. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again. And again, to my subscribers, thank you very much. I appreciate your help. I appreciate your support. Those who want to support this ministry, in the description box, there's a Patreon account. There's also a PayPal account. And so no obligation whatsoever. Some people do like to support the ministry, and some frequently ask how they can donate. So that information is available in the description box. But again, you're not under obligation to pay or anything. This is only for many of our subscribers who just want to bless the ministry, and we appreciate that. So we look forward to having you again, and until next time, take care and God bless.